Ever feel like the resources and advice out there for women are missing something essential? I thought so too, which is why more than 6 years ago, I created She Said, She Said. I'm Laura Cox Kaplan, and after 3 decades in communications and then advocacy and now juggling motherhood and entrepreneurship, trust me, friend, I get it. Making a real impact takes more than just passion. It takes the right mindset, the right skills, the right investments, and the right community. On this show, we dive deep with incredible women from all walks of life who have been there. We uncover the secrets to building influence, navigating tricky relationships, and staying true to ourselves even when it's tough. And let's face it, it often is. I also throw in my own favorite productivity and life hacks, things that have shifted my perspective and might help you too. Wherever you are in your journey, my goal here is to leave you inspired to define success your way and to help you build the confidence you need to tackle your biggest goals. Subscribe today and let's unlock your full potential, your confidence, and your greatest influence. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to have that natural gift for just making everyone around them feel valued and understood? Those folks seem to have that special quality that turns maybe a simple interaction into a more meaningful connection. Now, that quality might have more to do with practice and preparation than sometimes we realize. Today's episode is part of our She Said, She Said podcast, the Southern Sea collaboration series, and I could not be more excited to introduce you to somebody who is using social media to really dust off and freshen up timeless principles of etiquette and social awareness. And in the process, she's shifting how we think about human connection. This is such a perfect topic during this Valentine's week when we're thinking about connection, not just with our significant other, but with others who are near and dear in our lives. Mariah Grumet is the founder of Old Soul Etiquette, and she's proving that modern etiquette isn't about stuffy rules. It's about empowerment and building authentic relationships, even in today's fast-paced world. Mariah is a certified etiquette trainer who left a career in fashion to pursue a new passion, bringing a fresh perspective to a topic that some might consider a lost art. And if you've been to an airport recently, you know exactly what I'm talking about. What began as a hobby and a side hustle has flourished into a huge social media following, some 178,000 followers on Instagram alone. Along with that, she runs a thriving coaching and consulting business. Mariah is helping individuals and large organizations master the nuances of social and professional situations, but she's doing so with authenticity and with a high degree of emotional intelligence. I actually had the pleasure of meeting and sitting next to Mariah at this year's the Southern Sea Summit, and we connected instantly. I knew I wanted you to hear her fresh perspective. She is fantastic. Her expertise has been featured on The Today Show and Forbes and Southern Living, among many other publications and media outlets. She's also the author of a modern wedding etiquette book called What Do I Do? And she has another book called The Essential Wedding Planner, which is in the works as well. Now, in today's conversation, Mariah and I dive into her practical wisdom about modern etiquette, as well as her entrepreneurial journey, and really how she transformed her passion into a successful business that spans private consulting, interactive workshops, webinars, and keynotes for clients across a broad array of industries. Whether you're navigating the corporate world, building your personal brand, raising kids, contemplating a career life pivot, or simply wanting to show up more intentionally in your relationships, you will not want to miss this conversation. Plus, Mariah shares her expert take on handling some really tricky social situations that we all face, including managing those annoying but often delivered backhand compliments, as well as recovering from maybe those awkward first impressions that we flub, and so much more. Okay, friend, let's dive in. Here is episode 320 with my new friend, the delightful Mariah Grumet. Enjoy. Mariah, welcome to She Said, She Said.
Thank you, Laura. I'm truly honored to be here. I'm so excited.
Well, I'm excited too. You and I had such a wonderful time at the Southern Sea. I was fortunate to be seated next to you at a very special dinner, and it was like we were old friends and had known each other forever, despite our fairly significant age difference.
I I felt the same way. I mean, that conversation just flowed. I didn't even realize there was anyone else in the room, which is probably bad etiquette that I didn't acknowledge anyone else, but we were just going at it for the whole time.
We had a really, really great time, and it gave us a chance to talk through some of the topics that we wanted to talk about today. So I'm really
Yes.
thrilled to have you. You have built this incredible following on something that I think sometimes people think is a little stodgy, a little stuffy, not that interesting. And so, before we get into that piece, I'd love for you to kind of walk us through your career journey and that moment when you realized this is what you needed to be doing, because this is not where you started.
Sure. So to even back up kind of before my career started, when I was young, I competed in pageants as a teen. And not the ones you see on TV, they, interview style and service based. And so I learned from a very, very young age in addition to being an old soul, the importance of representing yourself and presenting yourself and speaking about yourself and carrying yourself. And I learned all of these things at a very young age. And so it was something that I was always very passionate about, but wasn't exactly sure what it meant, if it was a career. It was just something I was really interested in. And so, flash forward, I followed my kind of first love of fashion and went to school to study fashion business, and then started my career in the garment district in New York in corporate fashion. And when I moved to New York, I was looking for things to do on the weekends to connect with like-minded people. And so, as a 22-year-old would, I signed up for an etiquette course on a Saturday afternoon because, being an old soul, it's been something that I've been interested in and studied myself and was fascinated about the history of it. And so I signed up for this course, and I kind of had a, whatever you want to call it, gut feeling, wink from the universe, come to Jesus moment, whatever you resonate with. It was in that moment where I was kind of like, maybe this is what it is, that kind of ties in my love for connecting people and presenting yourself and speaking about yourself and reaching your full potential and all of that. And so that's kind of where I started, or where that moment was. And so I started an Instagram account just for fun to share the things that I've learned and studied on my own. And then flash forward, but completed my first certification, launched my website, and then quit my corporate job in September of 2021
Mhm.
to give this a try. It was
Yeah.
not up on its feet yet, but I wanted to see where it could go.
Yeah. Um, how did you decide to make the leap? I mean, it's one thing to have a side hustle, which a lot of people do. You have, a project on the side, and maybe a potential business that you're starting to think about growing. When was that moment? When did you have that moment when you thought, okay, this has real viability. It's time to actually quit my job?
Think it's important for me to be transparent too, that I was in a time in my life where I was young. I was saving so much money from, working in corporate America, that I was in a position financially where I could take a little break from, the
Hmm.
business was not making any money in the
Yeah.
beginning, and so I think that it's such an individual experience for everybody of when that kind of right time is.
Hmm.
But I'm a big gut listener.
Yeah.
I listen to my intuition. It's something that I feel I'm very lucky to have. And so I really try and follow that. And there was a moment where it was literally like a middle of the night, like, I need to quit my job and try this.
Hmm.
And it was kind of the right time in my life to do it. And so when they say there's no right time, there's no right time, but the pull was so strong that I couldn't ignore it. And I was very much like, if this doesn't work and I fall on my face, I have a great degree, I can do something else.
Yeah.
But the pull was strong. And so I just listened to that, and I worked really hard.
Yeah, yeah. It can be really hard to monetize content related businesses like yours. I have some personal experience with this. It's really,
Hmm.
really hard to turn content into dollars potentially. But you've been super strategic about how you've thought about structuring your business. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, it's not just building, and you do have an incredible following on social media,
Thank you.
178,000 some odd followers on Instagram alone. And that is amazing.
Thank you.
But you have there's a lot of other sort of adjacent components to what you're doing. There's a book, there's coaching, there's teaching, all these things. So maybe talk a little bit about kind of your overall business and what this looks like, because I think it's important for people to understand how you structure something that is, in essence, content based.
So funny enough, the business came before the content did.
Interesting.
So I launched my services. I had the Instagram and I was posting things, but I mean, I had a couple thousand followers at most at that point. And so in the beginning, I was teaching virtual courses. It was still kind of the height of the pandemic. And so that was just a business model that made sense at the time. But I always say, I think on social media, people think that I actually don't make my income from social media. Social media is my marketing tool that supports my business. So, and I think a lot of people don't understand that. The bread and butter of my business is that I travel around the country or locally, and I teach or speak to different corporations, businesses, clubs, colleges, organizations, things like that. So my workshops and my speaking gigs, that's the bread and butter of my business. I don't post a ton of it because of, I'd like to respect the privacy of a lot of my clients, but the business model, the speaking, everything like that, the workshops, the courses actually became before my social media started firing off.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. Well, you've done such an amazing job of building this incredible business
Thank
and
you.
offering such value in a space that I think is, in some respects, maybe a lost art form. There's really something that, we have not been paying attention to maybe as a society that I know for some of us is very disappointing. So I'm delighted to know you and to see what you're doing. I think it's really amazing.
Thank you.
You are offering services and teaching and coaching to a broad array of generations, from children to senior execs. Let's talk a little bit about the most common gaps that you see between these sort of vast generations of people that you're talking to. And I think that fact alone is super interesting, that you have such appeal across the generations. It's fabulous.
Thank you. I will say that when I started, I didn't really believe in myself enough to think that I could coach people who were 20, 30 years my senior. And so I really focused on the space of, the youth and teens. And I'm still in that space, of course, but actually my primary focus now is adults. I teach children far less these days, although I love to do that still. But I would say that the drastic difference, especially in the professional world, when we think about recent grads and people who have been in their careers for 30 plus years, is the communication style. And it's kind of trying to respect tradition and the way that things have been done, and that face-to-face communication, while also allowing for the world to evolve, because etiquette evolves as our world does. And so our younger generation, how do we respect the way that they communicate but still get them up to speed in ways that are to communicate in ways that are still deemed respectful in a face-to-face situation? So I would say the kind of expectation of communication and kind of what that respect means, that's where the biggest disconnect is. And technology, it's something that our younger generation is being raised with from a very, very young age, where the older generation is trying to figure out how it works in the business world with, what they've known to do for all these years. So I think that that's kind of where the biggest gap is.
Yeah, you're sort of touching on this concept of, communicating in a virtual world, which increasingly we all do all the time, regardless of your generation. Maybe talk a little bit about some of the specific challenges that you see folks encounter when they're communicating in the digital world, whether it's on Zoom, like you and I are sort of talking now, or whether it's via text or via email. Maybe some specific challenges that you oftentimes see people encountering.
When you're speaking to people, I mean, Zoom is even a step, or a video style is even a step up. But when you're texting, emailing, you have no visibility into somebody's tone, body language, and things like that. And so when we think about how people perceive us, our words are actually the smallest piece of the pie. Our nonverbal behavior represents over half of the way that people perceive us. So when we are having these conversations virtually, you're relying solely on somebody's word, which of course is important. It's a piece of the pie, but we're missing the energy. As people, we're so sensitive to energy, and you don't get to feel that. I mean, we can feel that a little bit more in a video call, and so that's great. But when you're texting, emailing, and so I always say, to really evaluate what your goal of the conversation is and really think, is this something that I can accomplish over an email, or is this something that needs to happen face to face? Is this something where a conversation where someone really needs to understand my tone? Someone needs to see my body language. Is this a first impression versus is this to confirm a meeting or check on a quick detail? And so I think that's, the younger generation, they don't want to talk on the phone. They don't want any face-to-face communication. It's easier to text. But I think we lack that energy connection that we really need as people to be able to respond properly to somebody.
Yeah. Any suggestions for kind of closing that gap, given that this is such a big set of challenges? My children are perfect examples of people who don't like to use the phone. I'm not much better. I really don't like to talk on the phone either.
I hear you.
But I love connecting like this. I actually love this virtual interaction. I like being able to see the person. I think this is, again, it's not the same thing as actually being in the room with somebody. But maybe talk about some, best practices that you have found that people are finding really useful.
I think it goes back to really considering what the conversation is about. And you can always make that introduction via text and then say, these are the things I'd love to discuss. When can we meet in person? When can we have a FaceTime call, a Zoom call? But I think that you kind of have one shot to make a first impression. You have, people's time is so valuable. And so I think that it really goes back to taking a pause and saying, what is my goal for this correspondence, for this communication? When you really want to put your best foot forward, it's probably best to speak about more serious or time-sensitive things when you can kind of understand somebody's energy.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that you often talk about the link between etiquette and confidence. And I think that's such an important topic, especially for women, frankly, for everybody, but especially for women. Talk a bit about how you see that particular connection.
I always say when I teach, I like to come from a place of empowerment and not correction. I know we'll talk about this, but etiquette is a little bit of a misunderstood topic. And so people see it, or most people see it, as a set of rules. And I think rules kind of put you in a box. And so I like to look at it instead as a set of tools. So my job, how I view my job, is to give you the tools you need to step out of your box and give you the confidence and give you the roadmap and the tools and a sense of knowing and a sense of preparation and ease. And so the more you can put in your tool belt, the more you can show up feeling prepared. That's an automatic connection to feeling more confident.
I love that. I absolutely love that. So if you, to your point about the rules and the fact that it can sort of feel a bit off-putting potentially, if someone listening out there is a mom and she's had some trouble maybe getting her teenage children's attention related to etiquette, any suggestions for how to kind of broach the subject or close that gap? I'd love some thoughts for a friend, of course.
Somebody wrote in and asked.
Yeah.
So I would sometimes the word is a little scary, right? Because people have a lot of preconceived notions about, that it's fancy or stuffy or that it's for a certain group of people or only for a certain time. And so for somebody who may not be super receptive of the idea, I'd like to kind of pose it as social intelligence, emotional awareness, emotional intelligence, social awareness, things like that. So that soft skills, like all of these words to say, I know that you have incredible aspirations and you're looking to do X, Y, Z. And I always say everybody is so qualified in our world today. Now we have access to resources and education. And so what's going to make you stand out? right? It's being able to tap into your unique abilities and be
Mm-hmm.
able to have that level of social awareness that somebody may not. And so taking the word etiquette out of it, and I always say holding your fork and knife correctly, 100% a part of it. Something that I speak to, something that I think everybody should know how to do. But teens aren't going to respond to that as well. So instead of say, instead you can say, how can you tap into your emotional intelligence to really help you move forward in a world that is competitive?
I love that. That is such a brilliant way of thinking about that, not just for teens, but for anyone, certainly for an executive, somebody who's trying to rise up the corporate ladder, get noticed. You talk a lot about executive presence, and I think this, clearly what you just said falls right in that bucket. Maybe let's expand on that topic a little bit more and talk about some of the other pitfalls that you find maybe corporate executives falling into where maybe a lack of etiquette training, proper etiquette, is holding them back.
I think a lot of it too, when I think about executive presence, it's like, how much do you trust yourself and how much are you allowing others to trust you?
Mm.
Are you leading by example? And so obviously these people have made it to a certain point in their career because they're capable and they're, excel in their field. And so I don't try and mess with that. They're obviously in the right place because they deserve to be. So instead, I think, how can we up your personal brand so that you can gain the trust of people who are looking up to you? When you're in that position, you're leading, and how can we lead by example so the people who are coming after you can look to you in those ways? And so I think that that's an important thing about executive presence, is how can you build that trust in yourself and your unique abilities, but also kind of gain that trust of the people who are looking to you.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so smart. On your Instagram, and one of the reasons why I think it's so incredibly popular, I love following you and I always learn something.
Thank you.
But you do a number of quick lessons basically on Instagram. And I'd love to run through a few, I think, very common challenges, including a couple that I just experienced just a couple of days ago that I think might be worth talking about. The backhanded compliment, one of my personal favorites,
Yes.
and how to handle
Yes.
that.
And that's kind of where the preparation comes in, because when we think about kind of that social awareness, it comes with thinking on our feet. And oftentimes when we're caught off guard, the first thing that we do is we freeze, right? It's that kind of like freeze response. And so fight, flight, or freeze response. But naturally, when someone comes for you, it's very easy for most people to either be confrontational, but most people freeze. And so my thought is, if you have some things in your back pocket that you can use, you can answer more composed. Because again, we're so sensitive to people's energy. And so it's actually more about how you respond rather than what you say. And so if we can be more composed about it and say, oh, I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you. Or, oh, you know what? I have been working really hard on that. I'm so glad you noticed. Or if you have to put the boundary up and say, I'm not really sure what you meant by that. People aren't exactly expecting you to react that way. So I think that a common misconception is that kindness or, being polite equals being weak. And I try and teach people the opposite, is that they can coexist. You can be, strong in your presence and firm in your boundaries and, sure of yourself and not let people walk all over you while still being polite and respectful doing it. You don't need to, be sweet and kind and let people just walk all over you. You can put that boundary up in a polite way.
I love that. I absolutely love that. It also reminds me of, the importance of preparation, right? Just thinking in advance about the situation you're about to be in. Again, you can't always 100% know exactly who's going to be in the room or who you're going to talk to, but you can sort of assume that you're going to get certain questions potentially. And being prepared to handle, especially the ones that you're likely to get that you may not want to respond to, I think is such a brilliant way to think about that. So smart.
I think really it is that again, it's a kind of like a balancing act between having the preparation, but also being able to think on your feet. But sometimes it's easier to think on your feet when you've given your brain space because you're prepared. So I think it's really kind of that those two things need to work together.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I have a few more rapid fires.
Okay.
When it's something you don't want to talk about.
Yes. So my kind of magic phrase here, or kind of like the formula, is that you choose the way that you're going to respond first. So that can either be like using humor, like, oh my goodness, my spouse would kill me if I talked about that, or perhaps it's just the boundary you put up. You know what? I really don't want to get into that right now, whatever it is. But the key to this is that you can pivot really quickly. You need to take control back of the conversation. So the way that I recommend doing that is you use the phrase, but I meant to ask you. And then you have something prepared. It goes back to that preparation. You have a couple topics prepared that you can just pivot to immediately. So someone says to me, you just got married. When are you having kids?
Oh my goodness.
My response, right? It's a very common one.
Horrible.
So my response might be something like, you know what? We are really enjoying this season of our life right now, but I meant to ask you. I just finished blah, blah, blah on Netflix, and I really need a new show, and I know you always watch the best shows. What do you suggest I watch next? So I just took back control of the conversation. Instead of me just saying, you know what? I'm enjoying this season of life right now. I'm not really thinking about that. That leaves it, that puts the ball in their court now to respond the way that they want to. But when I take the ball in my court and say, oh, but I meant to ask you X, Y, Z, I'm staying in control of the conversation.
Absolutely. And again, it's about preparation, preparing for the fact that you are likely to get that question. I love that. I absolutely
But again,
love that.
it doesn't always, you can't always prepare. Sometimes people come from left field with the wackiest things.
Yeah.
And you just need to know that no matter how caught off guard you get, you could still take back the control of the conversation.
Yeah. And controlling your reaction most of all, right? Not just how you say, but how you react to things that could be triggering for you on some level, because those are annoying questions.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. You have flubbed a first impression. What do you do?
So I would say, I try and think like what's actually a big deal? Is it a big deal that you're making it in your head, or is it actually something that you need to acknowledge? And so I do stand behind the fact that you don't have another chance to make a great first impression, but you do have more chances to make a great lasting impression. So I want people to consider, because sometimes they kind of, we all do it. We make the stories in our head worse than they actually were. So is this person even thinking about it? Is this something that I actually have to acknowledge and apologize for or bring up? Or is this something that I can just say, I'm going to do better next time?
Yeah. Yeah. So
it's
smart.
important to consider that.
Yeah. How about difficult conversations that occur, that come up, somebody brings up? Maybe it's a polarizing political topic, because we are in this world where people feel very divided for good reason, right? But maybe talk a little bit about how to navigate those difficult conversations when they come up.
I would give the same advice as I would with the backhanded compliment or the, off-putting question, anything. That "but I meant to ask you" phrase I use all the time. And I think it really goes back to making sure that you say, okay, how can I change the energy of this conversation? And sometimes, most times people want to be heard. And so I'll use, I hear you. I hear you on that. That's not saying I agree with you. That's not saying let me fight back about something that I think. That's saying, you know what, thank you for sharing your perspective. I hear where you're coming from. And that's a nice way to say, and then you say, but I meant to ask you, right? You don't leave it at that, because then they'll keep going. You still need to take back that control and switch the topic. But it's a way of saying, especially when it's someone who, has good intentions. You don't want to ruffle feathers because perhaps it's a professional relationship. I think it's nice to say, I'm listening to you. I value what you're saying. I respect that you came to me with confidence, but now I don't want to talk about this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. So smart. Let's talk a bit about your book and why you chose to write about wedding etiquette as opposed to kind of the broader topic of etiquette, even though I would argue there's a lot in the book that is, really useful regardless of what your particular etiquette predicament might be. So talk a little bit about why that particular approach.
So my publisher approached me and said, we'd love for you to write a wedding etiquette book. Can you give us some ideas? And so I did a lot of research, and, I still would love to write a general etiquette book. It's challenging because I find etiquette to be so situational, and I really look at it as tools and not rules. And so when I was looking for what to start with in terms of my first book, I did a lot of research about where the white space was in the market. And there hasn't been a wedding etiquette book written since the early 2000s. And so much has changed in our world, interfaith marriages, same-sex marriages, couples who are paying for their own wedding, couples who want to have unique weddings, wedding websites, like just so much that has evolved since the early 2000s that I wanted to have a place where we can kind of merge respecting tradition and doing things in a way that makes us good hosts while still having the wedding of our dreams and allowing those two things to coexist. And so I wanted something that applied to our world today, because there's so many different wedding styles and so many different preferences. And I want people to have the wedding of their dreams. But weddings are also a time where people want to do the right thing. They want to know what to do. They want to know how to do things. And so my book is kind of like a modern take on the traditions.
Yeah, it's so brilliant. It's a beautiful book. It's so well done, and I hope folks will check it out. I'll include a link in the show notes where folks can purchase it.
Thank you.
Before I let you go, though, where can people find you, and how can they work with you potentially?
Well, I am all over wherever social media you are. So Old Soul Etiquette, wherever you like to consume your content, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, of course, and my website is oldsoulettiquette.com, and my website details out all of my different services, the workshops that I offer, the keynotes that I give, and I'd love to work with anyone.
Yeah, I love it. I loved this conversation. I've loved getting to know you. You are such a joy.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much for what you're doing to make the world a better place and for spending some time with me today.
Thank you, Laura. It was such a pleasure.
Oh my goodness, I loved this conversation with Mariah so much, and I hope you did too. And of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so be sure to send them my way. A few quick things, though, that really resonated with me. First, Mariah's perspective on etiquette, not as a set of rigid and dusty rules, but as tools for empowerment. And I found that framing so refreshing. It's really about giving yourself the confidence to show up authentically in any situation while at the same time making others feel valued and respected. And then second, this idea of the power of preparation, which resonates so deeply with me. As Mariah shared in the conversation, just having a few key phrases and strategies ready, like her brilliant, "but I meant to ask you," as a conversation pivot, that allows us to handle some of those most awkward moments with grace, while at the same time staying in control of the conversation. So much to love about that. And then finally, I also loved how Mariah emphasizes that being polite does not mean being weak. You can be both strong in your boundaries and graceful in your approach. And it's not about letting people walk all over you. It's really about commanding respect while at the same time showing respect. Again, so much to love about that. If you'd like to connect with Mariah and maybe take advantage of her coaching, you can find her on Instagram at Old Soul Etiquette. And her new book, What Do I Do, is available now. There is a link in the show notes where you can purchase it. And then be sure to keep an eye out for Mariah's upcoming book, The Essential Wedding Planner. It's coming out soon. Friend, as always, thanks for joining me. Until next time, you take care. And remember, She Said podcast is a weekly production of She Said Media. This episode 320, is part of our 2025 The Southern Sea She Said podcast collaboration series.